I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Burns.
And this is the Baseball History Time Machine. And today is part 2 of the crazy story of the 1885 and 1886 World Series. So please listen to last week's episode before this one to get up to speed. Right. So the 1885 World Series ended either as a victory for the St. Louis Browns over the Chicagos, whom we can call the White Stockings or the Babies, or a tie depending who you ask.
I'm on the it was a tie side of things.
Well, I'm on the Browns one side, but either way, the excitement was palpable around the country when the two teams repeated as champions of their leagues, the National League and the American Association, in 1886 and met again for the third World Series.
Yeah, you mentioned last time that it was probably Al Spink who called it the World Series, and that was not really what it was originally called back then.
That's true. And between the 1885 and 1886 championship series, Al Spink had a real milestone. He founded the Sporting News.
Which still exists today, right?
It does, though only online. They stopped the printed version in 2012.
What was it like at the start?
The first edition came out March 17th, 1886, and the editions were 8 pages long and sold for 5 cents. From the start, the main features were baseball, wrestling, and horse racing. Thing is, remember that in 1885, Spink was not only the American Association's secretary, but was unofficially the Browns' secretary and press agent. So over the summer of 1886, there was a lot of coverage of both the Browns and the White Stockings, though Spink left those other jobs to found the paper.
What sort of stuff, though?
Well, you can actually go and read all those Sporting News editions online. You really can. It's really cool. In the very first issue on page 1, for example, the center column is about the White Stockings going to Hot Springs, Arkansas to get in shape for the season, like spring training, right? And in another column is a small note about Bob Carruthers that he is soon to set sail from Paris to New York, having resolved his salary issues to his satisfaction with Browns owner Chris von der Ahe by telegram.
And this is how he got the nickname Parisian Bob.
This is, although there's a little more to the story, and I will get to it one day when we do a whole episode on him. We talk about him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, back to the 1886 season.
All right, were the pennant races close this time?
In the National League for sure, and in the American Association closer than in 1885. In 1886, the Browns dipped into second place in mid-June, and were only 7 games up as late as August 22nd, but they ended the season 13 games in first place over Allegheny City.
Allegheny City? Is that Pittsburgh?
Kind of. It was a separate municipality north of the Allegheny River from downtown Pittsburgh that would be annexed by Pittsburgh in 1907. The team was actually first chartered as the Allegheny Baseball Club of Pittsburgh. In many papers, it was listed in the standings as Allegheny, though in the Sporting News, I see it listed as Pittsburgh with no H at the end.
Okay, and they finished second.
Yeah, and the Browns had the best home attendance in the major leagues. That's the third time in their 5 seasons as a team.
Oh, wow. How was the race in the NL? Another tense race between Chicago and New York?
No, actually. It was a 3-team race between Chicago, New York, and Detroit. And Detroit was in first place as late as August 25th, right? Then Chicago took over and went on a 24-2 tear.
That would have been a fun race to follow. Did they blow the race open in September?
It sure would have been, and no. Chicago still only won the pennant by 2.5 games. New York followed closely most of the season and was in second place, only 2 games out of first on Friday, August 13th. But maybe the curse of Friday the 13th affected them that year because they faded down the stretch and they ended the season 12 games back in third. They just could not keep up in September.
That's the thing about baseball. Teams get hot, teams get cold.
They do. But even with Chicago's tear, Detroit was still just 1 game behind going into the last day of the season. And to add to the excitement, Chicago had 1 game to play that day, but Detroit had a doubleheader. So a Chicago loss and 2 Detroit wins would have put the Wolverines in first.
The Wolverines?
That was what Detroit's team was called.
And wait, this is the National League. The Tigers are American League.
Okay, these guys are not related to the Tigers. The Wolverines were a National League team since 1881, though until 1886 they never finished better than 4th, and their best record was in 1882 when they were 1 game above 500 for the season.
Well, they sound pretty good in 1886.
And they were, though spoiler, they'll win the pennant and the World Series in 1887. But they actually have a better winning percentage here in 1886.
They must be a star-studded at Chicago then.
They sure are, and they are led by what they call the Big Four of Dan Bruthers, Jack Rowe, Hardy Richardson, and Deacon White. Now, those 4 played last year for the Buffalo Bisons in the National League, but new Detroit owner Frederick Stearns bought the whole Buffalo franchise so he could transfer all the stars to Detroit, right? They also feature Big Sam Thompson in the outfield, who in 1887 will win the batting title and set the record with 166 RBIs. But first baseman Bruthers is the big star in 1886.
Him I've heard of before, though.
For my money, he's the best pure hitter of the 19th century, him or Ed Delahanty. But he had a .342 lifetime average, 5 batting titles, 5 on-base percentage titles, 7 slugging titles, 8 times leading the league in OPS+. In 1886, he led the league in slugging for the 6th straight time, as well as in doubles and homers, while hitting .370. In homers, he was actually tied for the league lead with 11 with teammate Hardy Richardson, who hit .351.
370 and 351. Were they number 1 and number 2 in the batting race?
Actually, no, they were numbers 3 and 5. Numbers 1, 2, and 4 were Chicago's Heavy Woodman, King Kelly and Cap Anson, and New York's Roger Connor. Kelly hit .388 to win his second batting title. He played 53 games at catcher that year, which is a ton considering they played it barehanded. He played 56 in the outfield as well, and appeared in at least 5 games at every infield position.
That's versatility. What a utility guy.
Yeah, and he was arguably the single most popular player of the 19th century. And the song Slide, Kelly, Slide was sung in ballparks even after his tragically young death in 1894. Kelly, side note, James Corbett in his syndicated column Corbett's Corner in 1919 claimed that Kelly perfected the headfirst slide, which was considered foolhardy and was strongly discouraged by managers of Kelly's era.
But a catcher catching bare hand wasn't?
Nope, that was normal. Thing is, before the 1907 season, a rule was passed, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll explain why I'm telling you this in a minute. A rule was passed that if another runner passed a lead runner and tried to score while the lead runner was being tagged out, then the runner who did the passing would be called out. And this was because of something King Kelly did in 1885.
All right, this should be interesting.
Okay. Bottom of the 9th, Chicago down 1-0. Kelly on first, Williamson on second. Cap Anson hits a fly to right field. The runners hold until it's caught, and then they break for second and third, with Kelly beating the throw to second.
Kelly must have had some real wheels.
Yeah, and he had as many as 84 stolen bases in a season, which even under the old stolen base rule was pretty respectable for a guy who spent a lot of time at catcher. Mm-hmm. So Kelly pretends he's hurt his arm, calls timeout, Williamson comes over to help, and then Kelly tells him his plan. Are you ready for the plan?
All right, I sure am.
Okay. The following is reported in both the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the Dallas Morning News when the rule change is enacted. The pitcher pitches to the plate. Kelly breaks for third. The catcher throws the ball to third. Williamson breaks for home, and the third baseman throws the ball back to the catcher. You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so the catcher has the ball and is waiting for Williamson with open arms to tag him out. But as Williamson approaches him, he suddenly stops and opens his legs wide. Now Kelly, who, as we've established, runs like a deer, has rounded third. And as the catcher comes forward to tag Williamson, Kelly dives between his legs from behind and reaches the plate for the run. Chicago scores again in the 10th to win.
I'm stunned. That's amazing.
That is King Kelly. Now, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, in an article called How Kelly Cut Third, when Chicago scored the winning run, okay, this is a quote, Kelly turned to the crowd and shouted, "It's all over, the game's won, you can't get it back, open the gates and go home." He laughed, and at first the crowd was enraged and protested he didn't touch third base. Sam Wise yelled, "He cut the bag by 5 yards." But then a great cheer arose from the crowd of 10,000 for the trickiest ball player who ever walked the diamond.
Yeah, that's one hell of a trick, though.
And within days, it was on the lips of, half the country. Wait, here's another good Kelly antic that caused a rule change. Another rule change. Another one, right? Substitutions are not allowed while the ball is in play.
And what happened to make this rule official?
Well, Kelly was in the dugout, and a pop-up came close that the catcher or the third baseman wouldn't be able to get to. So Kelly leapt out of the dugout, called, "Kelly, now catching for Chicago," and made the play. From what I understand, it was not actually illegal before, since no one had ever done that.
I love this guy.
You and the rest of the United States in the 1880s.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.
Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.
Germany Schaefer in 1907 or 1908, he caused the rule change that you can only go around the bases in a counterclockwise direction. Like once you've gone to second or third, you can't go back to a base you've been to before.
Wait, so that actually happens?
Well, he
Somebody
was in
actually tried
first
to do
base.
that?
He's on first base, and there's a guy on third, right? And he steals second, hoping that they'll throw the ball and the guy can score from third. But they don't, right? So he's safe at second, and so the next play, he steals first. He goes back and
He steals first from second.
Yeah, thinking that maybe that's going to happen. Maybe that's going to happen.
I mean, he's hedging his bets. You know, what are we going to do
So
here?
that caused the rule that no, you
can
only
run
run to
you
one
can only run
direction.
counterclockwise.
So-
Okay. So the World Series approaches.
No, the World Series, as it was called, approaches. It's World Series now. And the possibility of a rematch of last year's extravaganza means that tension has really been building the second half of the season. Cap Anson threw a little gasoline on the woodpile when Chicago was in St. Louis mid-July to play the Maroons, the St. Louis National League entry after the Union Association folded.
The Union Association?
It was a major league, mostly in 1884. Fascinating tale for another day, though. Anyhow, the Maroons are in the National League in 1886. They finished 6 out of the 8 teams. Well, a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch asked Anson how the Browns might do if they played in the National League instead of the American Association. Anson says they're a pretty good team, so they'd finish around 5th or 6th.
It's a bit of a backhanded insult.
This gets back to the Browns, of course, who have a home game the next day. And after that, Browns owner Von der Ahe has a dinner for the team at his Golden Lion Saloon.
Yeah, you mentioned he had a bar in our previous episode.
Yeah. The Golden Lion Beer Garden was actually just past right field in Sportsman's Park. So plenty of people sat there and drank beer and watched the games.
Sounds like a pretty good way to spend the summer.
It sounds like a fantastic way to spend the summer. You know, I bet we would not have liked the toilet facilities.
Probably not. Okay, so the boss is having dinner, right?
Yeah, okay. For the team and a few other guests, there are toasts, there are speeches, there are songs.
I imagine not Slide Kelly Slide.
Well, considering it wasn't published until 1889, I would call that unlikely. But anyhow, the well-oiled Bob Carruthers gets up and says he doesn't think Chicago can beat them in the series, and he and Scissors Fouts, the other star pitcher outfielder for the Browns, say they have a lot of money that they would bet on it. So at 9 in the evening, the two drunk guys go over to the Lindell Hotel where they find Anson and a bunch of Chicago players. Carruthers corners Anson and says he'll bet him $1,000 that the Browns beat them in the series.
That's more than most people made in a year back then.
Actually, some versions of this have it at 5,000, but I'm pretty sure it's only 1,000, as if only. But as a down payment on the bet, he pulls out a roll of $200 and starts waving it in Anson's face. And Fouts says he wants in on the action too.
That's pretty gangster.
Dude, it's Bob Carruthers.
He is a legend, though.
He is. But Anson does not bite. In fact, according to the Post-Dispatch, quote, Anson simmered down, backed water, and crawfished until he made Carruthers and Fouts sick. Not only Anson, but Kelly, so prodigal with his money, refused to put up or offer a single nickel. For 2 long hours did Carruthers and Fouts hang around the Lindell Rotunda and at every whisper from a Chicago man flash the roll of bills in their faces and observe that money talked, but without effect.
Imagine doing something like that in 2025.
That would get people both crucified and idolized in the press, you know? But I gotta say, I think it's pretty cool. And that gasoline that Anson poured on the woodpile now has a burning fuse heading towards it.
Okay, now I'm going to pull an indie.
Okay, how?
I need you to sidetrack for a second.
Oh, yeah, okay, cool. About what?
About Scissors Fouts.
Scissors Fouts.
Who was Scissors Fouts? He seems like he's a fairly important guy back in 86.
Yeah, well, his name was Dave Fouts, but tall, skinny guys were often called things like slats or scissors back then. Okay, remember in our very first episode when I talked about Carruthers and his 1886 season when he went 30-14 on the mound and played right field on off days and was second in the league in slugging, led the league in on-base percentage, OPS?
Yeah.
Well, although Carruthers had been the Browns' ace in 1885, that 30-14 was not the best pitching mark for the Browns in 1886. Fouts was actually their pitching leader, going 41-16 with a league-leading 2.11 ERA.
So together, Fouts and Carruthers were, 71 and 30?
Yeah.
How many wins did that whole team have, actually?
They were 93-40, so that's 3/4 of the total wins.
Jeez, what a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, but unfortunately not for that long. Carruthers had a few more great seasons on the mound after 1886, but Fouts took a comebacker that broke his pitching thumb in mid-1887, and even when it healed, he could no longer throw his curve properly, and that was his bread and butter. So his career as a pitcher was more or less over. However, he was good enough in the outfield and at first base to continue to play until 1896. He even managed 4 straight years in the league top 5 in RBI, 1887, 88, 89, and 90. But here in 1886, he's still doing pitching and position playing both full-time. Okay, back to the season. On September 26, Von der Ahe sends a formal challenge to White Sox owner Al Spalding. It has 2 conditions. 1, all the games are to be played in St. Louis and Chicago. And 2, it would be known as the World's Championship Series. Spalding has a couple of conditions of his own before accepting. It's to be winner take all in terms of the gate receipts, all the ticket sales. And he wants to address the umpire issues that plagued the 1885 series that we saw last time. Each team chooses 2 umpires from their league. That will be a board of umpires for the series, and they'll settle any big issues. And the game umpires will rotate each game. Then, in early October, before Chicago has clinched the pennant, they hammer out the actual details. It'll be 6 games in 6 days from Monday, October 18th through Saturday, the 23rd. And this is because the regular season ends on the 9th, but Von der Ahe wants some dates to do a city series between the Browns and the Maroons. They've done that before. It was quite popular. If the World's Championship Series is undecided after 6 games, then a 7th game will be played Tuesday, October 26th at a neutral site. Von der Ahe wins the coin to choose that site, and he chooses Cincinnati, where the Browns beat the White Stockings in Game 7 last year.
Okay, now you're going to tell me about that series, right?
Now I am going to tell you about the series. On the 18th, Chicago hosts the first game of the 1886 World Championship Series. It features John Clarkson versus Scissors Fouts, the team's top hurlers.
Was Clarkson the best pitcher in the National League in 1886?
Clarkson was the best pitcher in the National League in 1885, 87, and 89, but not the top one in 1886. That honor goes to Lady Baldwin of Detroit.
Lady Baldwin?
Yep, Lady Baldwin. And this was Baldwin's only star season as well. As for Clarkson, he only started 55 games in 1886, down from 70 in his brilliant 1885 campaign, and only pitched 466 innings, down from 623.
623 innings pitched in one season. Was that the record back then?
It's 9th all-time, though the other 8 higher are all from before 1885. Will White has the record with 680 innings pitched in 1879, but the pitching distance was shorter, and a pitcher's arm was not allowed to rise above his waist during the delivery, so pitching was either underhanded or low sidearm.
Okay, was that a big offensive year?
You know, you'd think that when I say stuff like that about sidearm, but it was just the opposite. All of the pitching tweaks in the 1880s and 1890s were because offensive production was so low. From 1878 to 1880, Will White put up ERAs of 179, 199, 214, and did not lead the league once. And he pitched over 1,600 innings.
That's crazy.
So, you know, even getting super tired and stuff, he was still unscorable or unhit, right? Okay, back to game 1. Clarkson versus Fouts. Clarkson shuts out the Browns 6-0 on 5 hits. St. Louis papers blame the cold weather, and the Chicago News repeats Anson's summer claim that the Browns would finish 5th if they played in the National League. Anson thanks the Browns for the practice. Game 2 the next day is a different story, in case anyone was thinking the series was going to be a National League blowout.
I'm guessing the Browns even the series then.
They did a little better than that. Carruthers faced off against Jim McCormick, who went 31-11 for Chicago as the number 2 starter, and he clearly outpitches him. Now, remember last episode when I said Chicago's 10-0 loss to St. Louis in 1875 was the worst loss in franchise history?
Oh, no, I know.
Oh, yes. The Browns crushed Chicago 12-0, the worst loss in franchise history at the time. Carruthers one-hit the White Stockings, giving up just a leadoff single to George Gore in the first inning. Okay, there are several sources that list 2 hits for Chicago, and many that list just the one. McCormick was beat up badly, and Tip O'Neill hit 2 homers so far they ended up among the carriages parked beyond left field. You know, this was all horses and carriages. You didn't have cars here.
Yeah.
Also, Chicago made, get this, 12 errors.
12 errors in one game.
And 2 wild pitches by McCormick. Or they only made 9 errors. Again, sources do not entirely agree on this. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch says it was a one-hitter and Chicago made 12 errors. But the next day in Game 3, it's a blowout back in the other direction. See, Carruthers, over loud objections from team captain Charlie Comiskey and the other players, convinces Von der Ahe to let him pitch again, a second day in a row. He's obviously overworked because he walks 4 of the first 5 batters, and Clarkson coasts to an 11-4 victory.
Yeah, cool. 3 games, 3 blowouts.
Yeah, and now the series moves from Chicago to St. Louis, right? These 3 games were in Chicago. I should point out that there are serious grudges, feuds, whatever you want to call it. Lots of aggression building between the teams, and lots of vitriol in the newspapers. Game 4 starts, and the Browns are soon down 3-0. In the second inning, a double steal attempt by the Browns results in an out and a run, but that run is scored by Bill Gleason running into King Kelly and spiking his foot badly. There's a delay while his foot is treated, and the St. Louis crowd is calling for more physical damage to Chicago players.
They're still up 3-1, right?
Yeah, but they have the problem St. Louis had yesterday. See, Clarkson is pitching Game 4 because McCormick has such bad arthritis that he had to stay in Chicago, and their number 3 starter, Jocko Flynn, has such a sore pitching arm that he can't even raise it, not even above his waist. So Clarkson gets tired, and the Browns score in 4 of the last 5 innings. But something remarkable, you're going to like this, something remarkable happens in the 5th inning. Tip O'Neill comes up with runners on 2nd and 3rd. Now, he smashed the ball into the beer garden in the 3rd, and, you know, he's been hitting well last year and this year in the series. So Chicago's a little leery of him. So Clarkson and Kelly have a chat, and they decide to walk Tip O'Neill on purpose.
Actually, an intentional walk does not sound like a bad idea at this
But
point.
people didn't do it back then. The book, A Game of Inches, which is a brilliant book about the evolution of baseball, records a couple of instances earlier that may have been intentional walks before this happened. But this is the first real, obvious, intentional walk. And it happens in the World Series. And it takes 3 Hall of Famers to do it. See, Cap Anson doesn't want to do it, but Clarkson and Kelly prevail. You know, they discussed this. And the bases are now loaded by a tactic that we take for granted today, but which even the St. Louis papers called contemptible.
I thought it's always been a thing in baseball, like intentional walking.
Well, it didn't work either because Gleason hits a 2-run single to center in front of the jubilant crowd of somewhere between 8,000 and 13,000 people. And then the game is halted as things take a darker turn. A very vocal Chicago supporter is actually thrown out of the stands and onto the field, and a crowd descends on him, and he gets the crap beat out of him until the police can intervene and break it up.
Some sort of mob justice or something.
Yeah, very much mob justice. Okay. When play resumes, St. Louis ends the inning up 5-3, but Chicago ties it in the top of the 6th. In the bottom of the inning, the Browns load the bases with Carruthers playing right field up. Fouts is pitching for the Browns. Bob hits an infield fly to second, but there's no infield fly rule in 1886. So Fritz Pfeffer lets it drop, hoping to start a double play to end the inning. They get the first out, but the throw is dropped, trying for the second out, and a run scores. Browns up 6-5. Runners are at 1st and 3rd with O'Neill up, and he again walks to load the bases. This time, it appears to be like too carefully pitching to him and not intentionally walking him. And Gleason does literally exactly the same thing he did before and hits another 2-run single up the middle. It's now 8-5, and it's starting to get dark, so the 7th inning is obviously going to be the last one. There's no stadium lights in 1886. 3 up, 3 down later, the game is over, and Chicago has lost.
Still, that was an exciting game. I really wish they were able to film these. It would have been very cool to actually see something like this on MLB TV or something.
It'd be awesome if you could see this on MLB TV. Game 5 has an even bigger crowd, and this time apparently a lot of Browns fans from out of town and a larger proportion of women. It also has controversy right from the start. Okay, who's going to pitch for Chicago? Spalding tries to sneak in Mark Baldwin, who Chicago signed to an 1887 contract a few days earlier, but Von der Ahe, with good reason, objects to Chicago using a player that was not on the 1886 team roster. The umpires board is to decide the matter, but one of them is nowhere to be found. One supports Spalding, one supports Von der Ahe, and honest John Kelly, the fourth, refuses to be the tiebreaker. So they toss a coin, and Baldwin is not allowed to pitch.
So wait, Clarkson has to go again.
It's ironic that they had two 30-game winners and a 20-game winner on their staff, and now they have no staff. And poor McCormick, too. This season is his last hurrah, and he'll retire after 1887, after what? It's a borderline Hall of Fame career. You should look it up and see. I wouldn't be angry if he was elected to the Hall of Fame, but the arthritis in his leg is just too bad, and he's still in Chicago. Clarkson has pitched 3 games in 4 days. He can't go again. Even if they wanted him to go again, they can't go again. So shortstop Ned Williamson, who has pitched odd innings here and there the past few seasons, starts for Chicago, and the Browns use their young third starter Nat Hudson, who was 16-10 as a rookie this year. Things go badly for Williamson. 3 hits and a walk give the Browns 2 runs. So the White Stockings shuffle things around defensively so that right fielder Jimmy Ryan can pitch. Okay, the score is actually only 3-2 after the top of the third, but the Browns break it open with 4 runs in the third and 3 more in the sixth. Hudson actually throws a 3-hitter, which all sources I've seen agree was a 3-hitter. And the final score is St. Louis 10, Chicago 3.
Yeah, it's not looking good for Chicago.
It is not. And Spalding is angrily spouting off about the Mark Baldwin thing. But this is interesting, right? The papers are not paying attention to that. In fact, some of these Chicago papers who've claimed Chicago could beat St. Louis whenever they want to are now claiming the series has been fixed to have more games so the teams can earn more money from the gate receipts. Okay, that's not quite true. Several are hinting at it, but only the Chicago News accuses them straight out and with no evidence. They actually ignore the fact that Clarkson can't physically pitch 3 days in a row, that McCormick is 300 miles away in Chicago, and Flynn has what turns out to be a career-ending arm injury, and they say that having the shortstop pitch means the fix was in, the game was rigged. They further ignore the plain fact that Williamson was battered and claim he was effective and endangered the scam, so he was replaced with a worse pitcher. So Chicago intentionally tanked Game 5.
Yeah, that's not really fair.
And it's just plain not true. But the plot thickens, since, as the news says, Chicago can beat St. Louis anytime they like, so they'll win Game 6 to force a Game 7, right? This means that the Browns can silence all of these rumors if they win Game 6. But should they lose, a lot of people will continue to believe that Chicago threw Game 5. This also means there is a massive amount of money being bet on Chicago to win Game 6. Spalding and Anson are actually shocked by the charges of losing on purpose.
So who's going to pitch?
Well, Game 6, Carruthers and Clarkson. Clarkson has had an off day, and he'll get 2 off before Game 7 should it happen, so Chicago's feeling pretty confident. And it seems justified. After 4 innings, he's given up no hits, struck out 6, and walked 1. O'Neill once again. And Fritz Pfeffer is providing the offense, scoring from a single in the second and a homer in the fourth. In the fifth, the game is delayed, and there's a possible rainout coming, which would be great for the Browns, but the rain stops and the game continues. Pfeffer scores yet again in the sixth after a triple, and Clarkson keeps shutting down the Browns. In the seventh, O'Neill smashes a triple, but overruns third base and is tagged out. So even the first Browns hit, which was that, is an out. Carruthers has only given up 5 hits himself, though. In the bottom of the eighth, Comiskey singles to right, and then Kurt Welch lays down a bunt. The throw to first bounces in front of Anson and then off his arm, and Comiskey scores. Clarkson gets 2 out, but Welch is on third base by then. Clarkson then walks Doc Bouchon to bring up the Brownie leadoff man, Arlie Latham. The count goes to 3-2, and then Latham golfs a low pitch over Abner Dalrymple that rolls all the way to the left field fence. It's a triple, clears the bases, the score is tied 3-3. The crowd goes crazy, and play is halted for 5 minutes as hats, handkerchiefs, and umbrellas fill the skies.
Umbrellas.
This is the 19th century. This is what they did. They threw stuff in the air when they were happy.
It's kind of like a hockey game.
What would you do in a baseball game? You wouldn't want to throw. Hats are expensive.
They're expensive.
Even hot dogs.
Yeah,
expensive.
but even in hockey, those guys, they throw their hats, and I'm like, that hat's gone, bro.
Carruthers grounds out to end the inning. He goes to the mound, and in the top of the ninth gives up his first hit since the fourth, but gets out of the inning. Browns need a run to win.
On the edge of my seat here. This is so exciting.
O'Neill smashes a drive to deep right center, but Ryan snags it with a circus catch at the fence. And Clarkson gets the next 2 outs, and we are going into the first extra inning game in series history.
Oh, wow.
The Browns retire the side in the top of the 10th and come up to bat. Welch is hit by a pitch, but he doesn't get a base because he didn't try to avoid it. But then he singles to center. Fouts then bounces a ball off the ground so high over the pitcher that there's no chance for a play by the time it comes down. And the Browns have 2 men on. Yank Robinson bunts Fouts along, and there are men on second and third base, and the stage is now set for the most famous play of 19th century baseball.
I'm sweating bullets, man.
Okay. Charlie Comiskey's recollection of the play is that Kurt Welch was often running on the pitch, but Kelly called a pitch out because he was anticipating an attempt to steal home, and Welch was taking a lead so far off the bag. But Clarkson threw the ball over the plate, and Kelly was expecting a pitch out, and it bounded back to the grandstand, while Kurt Welch, perhaps the greatest fielding center fielder of the 1800s, scored the winning run. Was it a steal of home, a wild pitch, or a passed ball? I don't know, but I do know this. The $15,000 slide is the stuff of legends.
The $15,000 slide?
Yep, because Welch just gave the St. Louis Browns all of the gate receipts for all 6 games in the winner-take-all World Championship Series.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
This was not an exhibition series. Now, different accounts of the play from different sources, both contemporary and modern, do vary a lot in what exactly happened, even whether or not Welch actually slid across the plate. But Anson's babies have lost the series. Half of the estimated crowd of 10,000 descends on the field, and the players cheering wildly. Come on, I wish I could have been there.
Yeah, that makes 2 of us.
The Chicago News, right, the guys that said the fix was in, the Chicago News even reports, humiliating as the confession is, we are obliged to admit that the champion baseball players of the world reside in St. Louis.
That sells the idea of a fix, at least.
It does. The St. Louis Globe-Democrat, recalling Anson's boast after Chicago's victory in Game 1 that the Browns were good practice, writes, Baby Anson can now tell his Chicago admirers how his team practiced with the Browns. But it isn't just this series. There were postseason series between the second-place finishers of both leagues against each other, the third-place finishers, and the last-place finishers, and the American Association teams won all of those series.
Mm-hmm.
Now, each Brown ended up with a $580 World Series share, which, as we know, is more than a year's salary for a factory worker at the time. So this day is the absolute peak of the American Association, and it can lay claim to being the best baseball league in the nation. From here on in, it will all be downhill, and there's a lot of financial maneuvering I'll talk about one day that leads to its eventual downfall. But to anyone who says that the American Association was never the equal of the National League, you are wrong. There were times when they played better, played a more exciting brand of baseball, and even drew way more fans to the ballpark.
Yeah, this was a brilliant story. Does that mean we're done for the day?
We are done for the day. This was a long one. Hey, since everybody out there likes this series, go to patreon.com and join Indy Nidell's Baseball History Time Machine. Everything we get there will allow us to spend ever more time writing and producing these episodes, and we can do shorts and extra things, outtakes and whatever, and you'll get the content ad-free as a bonus. So, that is it from me, Indy Nidell.
And me, Burns.
And the Baseball History Time Machine.